Welcome back to Red Cedar Radar. I'm joined by some familiar faces, Brendan and Paul. Today, we're going to break down Michigan State's disgusting loss to Iowa at home and take a look ahead into the future to talk about their upcoming game against Ohio State on February 25th. How are you today, Paul?
I'm hanging in there. It would be nice to have had any semblance of a competent offense or defense last night.
Right.
But other than that,
right.
doing okay.
What about you, Brendan? How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I mean, weather's nice out here in East Lansing, so good enough to go outside, go for a walk, enjoy the nice sunshine. So that was definitely the bright side of the past 48 hours.
Absolutely. When I texted you, Paul, not too long ago, or a couple days ago, about doing a pod, I was hoping that we would all gather here and just talk about, how much we owned Fran McCaffrey, but we're going to be having a different conversation today, unfortunately. And I maybe should have expected that with the way the season has gone, but I was just on a high. After Michigan State was coming off a great win against Illinois, Penn State, and then always a nice win over Michigan, although I don't really know if that even counts because they are having such a terrible season, but it counts in my heart, and that's what matters. Brendan, you were there at the Iowa game last night. Talk a little bit about things from your perspective when you were at the game, things that you saw, and then we can kind of break things down after you share your points.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I was in the press row. The energy I thought from the team all around was just lacking. The building was kind of dead a little bit. It was obviously Tuesday night game, so it's not going to be. I didn't expect it to be as rocking as it was against Illinois, which was a Saturday afternoon game, or even that Maryland game a couple weeks ago, which was also on a Saturday. But the vibes just felt off. And even in the post game press conference, Davis Smith said to Tom Izzo at halftime that hey, the vibes are off. There's some I have a funny feeling about this game, kind of things of that nature. And it kind of showed on the court. I thought the team looked a little complacent. They lacked energy, which is also something Tom Izzo said after the game. The complacency thing, I think, is kind of a real issue because big win against Illinois last Saturday, then coming off back-to-back road wins, something that they haven't done all year is win on the road. They only had one road win going into that Penn State game. Then they beat Penn State, beat Michigan. Thought maybe they're, too good for what they are. I'm not 100% sure. Complacency, I do think, was a factor. And energy, those are my two big things. They just laid an egg. There's not a ton to it, in my opinion, in terms of, I think that they definitely shot well from three. I think they shot 50%. 2-point shooting was not good, but rebounding, I thought they rebounded well. The defense was lackluster, but that kind of goes along with energy in that aspect. So overall, I need to see them in another game. Can they bounce back? Can they use this to have a chip on their shoulder coming up on Sunday? We'll see. So I'm not going to take away too much from this game, not going to overreact like I've seen a lot of people do. I'm just going to take it for what it is, and I think they just laid a dud.
Here's a question, maybe, Paul, you can share an answer to this, but why do you think they haven't been able to keep their momentum throughout the season? We've seen spurts or a good game here or there where they really put things together, and those effort-related things that Paul and I talked about in the last podcast episode were there. They seemed like they were very well connected in some games, and now it just seems like, why at this point in the season are they complacent? I don't understand that at all. For being such a veteran team, they know where they're at in the season, what's at stake, Big Ten tournament, NCAA tournament, right down the road. What do you think is going wrong with this team, and why are those things still plaguing them? Do you have any ideas, Paul?
Well, I would say it's kind of the same problem that they've had pretty much the entire year, which is there's no real kind of alpha dog leader on this team. And there's no Mateen Cleaves personality, at least not in the playing group. He might be on the bench recovering from a gunshot wound, but he's not playing. He's only a freshman. Jeremy Fears is, of course, what I'm referring to. And, players like A.J. Hoggard and Malik Hall in particular, they need to show up every day. And Malik Hall's been doing a better job of that. last night was not one of them. He had just a quiet first half. He was basically kind of non-existent. He disappeared again, which he hadn't done in a while. He'd had several good games in a row. And Hogard just, I mean, they just missed layup after layup. They didn't have good ball movement, and that's on the point guard. And then you got Walker, who I think still is still sort of struggling through that groin pull that I think has been bothering him for a couple months now and may not fully ever heal. So that piece is a little bit, not quite as effective. You don't quite as much have that weapon where he can just kind of take over the game. He hasn't really done that recently, right? And then Akins has been very good, but he also was kind of lackluster. So again, when your top four are all just kind of lackluster, and I think it's due to personality, honestly. And I think that when they all kind of get their heads together and are focused, the high end of this team is still very high, but the low end is really bad. It's what we saw last night. So I think we're going to still get this inconsistency. Now, the thing that could be happening in part, and we alluded to that earlier in the discussion, was that they came off that big win over Illinois, the two big road wins, but honestly, the regular season Big Ten title is out of reach very much. I mean, it's ironic because I posted an article the morning of the game saying that MSU's odds had increased to 1 in 200, which is still terrible. But you could see a path. It's like, well, if the stars align just right, maybe this team could still win it, could still share the title. But I mean, like, again, it's less than 1%, so that's not very likely. So it's possible that they just honestly didn't really have a whole lot to play for until the tournament starts. And that's kind of true, but like, you can still, I mean, you shoot yourself in the foot, it's still going to hurt, even if it doesn't kill you. So, I mean, I think that's kind of where they are. And just for the sake of an early peek at some math, the odds are still not zero that they'll win the Big Ten title, but it's now 1 in 10,000. So there you go. That's what a lost eye will do for you.
No problem. No problem. Sorry, my dog's barking if you hear that. But something that I found interesting that I think was brought up maybe in when we talked about the last Michigan game, and then Brendan just brought it up about the Iowa game, how big of a role Davis Smith must have in the locker room. It's kind of a new thing, I think, this year, but great for Davis Smith. I think he's a great kid. He had a really great moment in the Michigan game. Cool for him. And I think he meshes with the team well, but why aren't one of our starters, or why aren't one of our veteran players that guy? That seems like a big tell right there.
Yeah, I pointed this out actually in a forum post. I was doing my article last night. I'm like, I'm just going to jot down my thoughts, put in our Spartans Illustrated forum. You have to become a subscriber to read it. But I got a lot of good feedback on this, and we had a lot of good conversation. But I basically was touching on Davis Smith kind of being the vocal leader of this team. Yeah, AJ Hogard will show up, every fourth game, fifth game, somewhere around there. But Davis Smith being the vocal leader, whether it be at halftime, getting the team fired up, or whether it be before the game, telling the coach that the vibes are off. Like, why is he the guy? Like, that's a problem, and that's been a problem all year. Now, credit to Davis Smith for stepping up where there might be a void and he can insert himself in there, but still, this team is veteran filled. I mean, think about it: Malik Hall, Jaden Akins, Tyson Walker, AJ Hogard. I mean, there's so many veterans on this team that you would like to think one of those guys at least would step in and fill that void and be a leader. I mean, think about some of those best teams. Paul mentioned it, I believe. You had Mateen, you had Draymond Green, guys that weren't afraid to get in their faces and expect the higher level of play out of the guys. And I just don't see anyone on this team that can do that on a consistent basis. So that, to me, it's not something that just popped up last night in the Iowa game. It's something that's been lingering throughout this entire year. Maybe it came a little bit more to light last night. But yeah, that's my biggest issue with this team. And until they get consistency in that aspect, I don't see this team really progressing past the second weekend, which was the preseason goal, right? Making it to the Final Four. I just don't see them progressing past the second weekend if this is a lingering issue, which I think it is, because it's not something you can fix overnight.
Yeah, I agree. Anything else that you want to touch on for the Iowa game? Like Brendan said, I think it is important to kind of take a deep breath, and look at the rest of the schedule going forward and kind of think about like, and Paul's going to touch on this too, like the Big Ten tournament in NCAA. But it did suck to see that. And it felt like maybe their problems had, been washed away and they were kind of on the uptick. So to see a loss like that, especially at home, kind of makes it feel like the sky's falling a little bit. But anything else that you want to say about Iowa before we kind of move on to previewing Ohio State, and then Paul kind of shares where he's at with his math now after this loss?
I had a couple more comments on the Iowa game, just kind of, again, looking through some of the statistical trends. Because one thing we talked about a few weeks ago was the problem with rebounding. And it's interesting because, this team is still not a great rebounding team, but they've actually done a pretty good job in the last 4 or 5 games at keeping the other team off the offensive glass. So, and I think that's a trend that's very positive that looks real to me. Like that was a point of emphasis, and they basically did fix it. Like they're still not rebounding their own misses that well, but the last 4 or 5 games, they've done a pretty good job in the defensive glass. So that's encouraging. But the other problem though, on the defensive end is the last 8 opponents in a row have all shot the ball really well. The effective field goal percentage has been over 50% for 8 games in a row. That's not good. And that tells you that there is maybe a more systemic problem with the defense. I think, it's always, I think there's been some lucky shots get hit and, that'll happen, but 8 games in a row, that's a trend that's real. So, that's a concern. We saw a lot of defensive breakdowns last night. And just allowing, slips to the basket for layups and dunks. That's how Iowa got most of their points. They did not hit a lot of outside shots. They were 4 for 13 from 3. So, that's just crazy. And then the other stat that maybe has been disguising some of the problems on defense is MSU has been very good at creating turnovers, but Iowa only turned the ball over 6 times. And so, that's, I think, been kind of disguising some of the problems because they've just been able to limit shots that the other teams have gotten. Historically, they've done that through rebounding. This year, they've done it through turnovers, which is strange, but true. And then they also fouled a lot last night. They put Iowa on the line. I forget what the free throw discrepancy was, but it was big. And I don't think it was due to anything, any sort of suspect officiating. And I'm not above calling that out. But the officiating was fine last night. I didn't have a single problem with the officiating. They just fouled a lot. So, that's a problem. The other team shoots well and gets to the free throw line and doesn't turn it over. It's hard to win. So,
Iowa had 23 free throws to Michigan State's 14. So 23-14.
Yep. And that's, and I think that's appropriate based on the way the game went. So, they gotta tighten it up on defense. And I think back to that Indiana State win right after Christmas, and how, attention to detail, focus, and how they shut down a team that ran some really good offensive sets, and they shut them down basically. They didn't completely shut them down, but they need to get back to that. So they can do it, but we haven't seen it in a while, and hopefully it'll come back.
Any comments at all about the mix and matching that Izzo has been doing at the center position? Do you think that has played a role in Michigan State's struggles to not have kind of something very set in stone in that position? It seems very up in the air, and he's trying lots of different things all the time with that. Any thoughts there?
Go ahead, Brendan.
Yeah, in the second half, I thought Booker should have played a couple of minutes there in the second half. I thought he looked decent in the first half, and I think he played 5 minutes. He looked strong on a couple of defensive plays. I think he had a basket as well. Yeah. He finished with 2 points, grabbed 2 rebounds. So I thought he had a decent game. He had that and one, missed the free throw though. But I thought Booker had a good game. I would have liked to see him in the second half. I'm not going to make a huge uproar like you see on social media, but I do think I would have played him if I was the coach. Same thing with Cohen. I do think they bring a kind of a different explosive element to the table, especially in the offensive end. And in a game where it was kind of more of an offensive shootout type of game. I know the score might not have reflected that per se, but both defenses were kind of struggling. So I think I would have played Booker, would have played Carr a little bit more, but especially Booker. Maybe not Carr because you weren't forcing a ton of turnovers, and Carr's a really big threat in the fast break game. So especially Booker, I would have played a little bit more.
Yeah, I think the center position is interesting. I'm less concerned about the center position than maybe even Brendan is, because I think that MSU can survive without high level center play, because the guard play can be so good if they're all kind of locked in. But what I do think I've seen, especially in the first half, is I think Izzo is still in tinker mode, and because he's been trying to force a post game, and so there were several attempts to feed the post with either Cooper or Sissoko to sort of try to get that part of the game ignited. And I think it is very intentional. And it didn't go well. Like we saw, a couple like turnaround jumpers or hook shots that like barely hit the iron. So like it ain't working. And, but I understand why he feels like he needs to try it, because if you can get that ignited, that gives you an additional, element to this team that would be helpful. I don't think it's necessary, but it would be helpful. And I mean, Sissoko is kind of fading. I don't know if he's still struggling with some of the personal issues he had with the death of his grandmother, or, anytime you have a kid that, again, he's a long way from home, that's hard. That could be it. Cooper, I think, is up and down. He's had some pretty good games and some less good games. He rebounded well last night, so I'm still, pretty bullish on Cooper. Kohler is getting better. Booker is getting better. So there's some hope there. But yeah, I feel like Izzo is very much in tinker mode. And I feel like tinker mode kind of starts to fade away at the end of February historically. And so he's either going to give up on that, or, he'll tinker with it if the game is competitive, in which it was. I look back and it was shocking to believe that game was tied with 6 minutes left in the first half. And then those last 6 minutes, like I think Iowa hit like 3 threes and Hogard missed like 3 layups. And then all of a sudden they're down, 12 at half. And at that point, then you're just kind of in survival mode and trying to catch up. And so I can understand him not playing some of the freshmen in the second half because they were so far behind and, couldn't really catch up. So that's kind of my take on that situation.
Yeah. One more thing real quick on the Iowa game. Carr and Booker combined 2 for 3 from the field. Sissoko, Cooper, and Kohler combined 1 for 5 from the field. So just kind of, Cooper did have a couple shots in the post. Madi had a shot in the post early on in the game. And a turning point, I thought, in the game, Michigan State really struggled at the free throw line. 50%. They shot 50% from 3 and 50% from the free throw line. That's a problem. But when Kohler got to the line, he could have cut it to a 6-point game. Not sure the exact time of it, but Kohler late in the second half had a chance to cut it to a 6-point game. Missed both free throws. Iowa got the board, ran down, easy bucket, made it 10-point game. So that was a 4-point swing. And at that point, with Hogarth missing layups and offense just not seeming to really click, and the defense not getting a ton of stops there down the stretch, it was pretty much over from that point on.
I do agree with your point, Paul, that Kohler is getting better. I have thought that over the past couple games, like he's made small improvements each time. Obviously not with his free throws, but I've noticed a little more fire in him, whereas before it felt like he was just trying to stay afloat, and maybe his conditioning was lacking as he was getting back from that injury, but he seems like he's getting more comfortable every time he is out on the court. Are we ready to move on to Ohio State, give a preview into that game, kind of give some predictions, and then give Paul the floor to really get into the things that people want to talk about? So Michigan State will take on Ohio State at the Breslin Center on February 25th at 4 o'clock p.m. And the game will be on CBS. Ohio State is kind of crazy. They got rid of their coach in the middle of not the middle, but like right now, just a couple weeks ago. And then they went on to defeat Purdue, which I thought was crazy and I didn't expect to happen. Should MSU be scared of Ohio State? What's your opinion, Brendan?
I'm curious to see what the Buckeyes do on Thursday night, because coming off a big upset, they're a lot of teams, sometimes they're due for a letdown. Maybe they get too high on themselves and then lose kind of a game that maybe they should win or should be competitive in, but they just lay an egg. kind of like Michigan State just did. So Ohio State could be due for something like that Thursday night. They go to Minnesota, I believe. So I'm curious to see what they do there. Then I'll know a little bit more about kind of their mindset coming into the Breslin Center. But look, Ohio State has a chance to really turn around their season. I mean, I don't think they'll make the NCAA tournament. But I mean, win against Purdue, and if they beat Minnesota, and then a chance to go back-to-back road wins on top of that win against Purdue. I mean, it's a team definitely coming in kind of on the upswing, and they're a decent shooting team, especially from the free throw line. So if this turns into a free throw type game where there's a lot of whistles, the refs are whistle happy, then, I mean, I favor Ohio State. I mean, I'm looking at the stats right now. They got 3 guys that are shooting 83+% from the free throw line. Jamison Battle shooting 95%, which is ridiculous from the free throw line. So Michigan State, the game they really can't get into against Ohio State, is a super physical game where guys are constantly going to the free throw line. Curious to see how that plays out, that aspect of it. But yeah, I think we'll know more about this Buckeyes team minus their head coach Chris Holtmann, and with the interim, and we'll know a lot more about them and what they're capable of. I think here coming up against Minnesota on Thursday night.
I did see that the interim head coach cried after they beat Purdue, and I mean that's kind of cool. But like you said, I just wonder if it was, a sort of thing like, oh, we just lost our coach. We kind of have to band together if we want to get this done. And it was kind of one of those overall team wins. I didn't watch the game. I wish I would have watched the game because I bet it was good. But I'll be curious to see if they really do have that momentum. And it's kind of a quick turnaround from Thursday to Sunday. I know, not that quick, but a decently quick turnaround. Is their game at Minnesota, or is it at home on Thursday?
I believe it's at Minnesota.
Yeah, so add travel in there too for both of these games, and we'll see. But any thoughts going into Ohio State, Paul?
Yeah, I'm a little more optimistic about MSU's chances. I mean, just to look at the projected spread, based on Ken Palm, it looks like MSU should be favored by about 8 points, which is about what they were favored over Iowa. So I guess there's that. But the thing gives me pause is that Ohio State is a team that, in the preseason, they were projected like third. They were supposed to, so they're a team with talent, and they are, their offensive profile is pretty good. They're not a very strong defensive team, but they're a good offensive team, which is not unlike Iowa. So that kind of makes you a little nervous. And I think the last time MSU played them was in the Big Ten tournament last year, where they punked us with a performance that was very similar to the performance that MSU put out last night against Iowa. But that's the bad news. But the good news is, I think that there will at least be a temporary wake-up call for the Spartans. I think they're going to be focused for this game. It's going to be at home. I think they're going to be determined not to have the same thing happen that happened against Iowa. And if they bring a decent level of focus, they should win. And I also think, the travel for Ohio State is not great, to have to go from Columbus to Minneapolis and then turn around 2 days later, come to East Lansing. I'm kind of a proponent that kind of bad travel has a bigger effect on outcomes than we think. So I wouldn't be surprised to see MSU, put a good 15, 20-point win on them. I really do believe that that's more likely. I mean, obviously they could lose, but I think a blowout win is actually more likely in this case, because I think we'll be on the upswing of the teeter-totter, just waiting for the drop again, which will happen in West Lafayette a week later. Most likely.
Right. That's what I was thinking too. Yeah, I think I agree with that too. I think Ohio State just has a lot going on, and they'll be traveling a lot. And I just think, hopefully, I don't want to say too much, because I would have said that we would have been able to do that, or the team would have been able to do that against Iowa. But being at home, it being a Sunday, it'll probably be more full than it was Tuesday night. Brendan won't be in press row, so maybe that'll be good luck for the Spartans. And
maybe.
Will the students be there because it's spring break?
Yes.
Or is it okay?
They'll be there. Might not be as many students. We'll see, but the zone will be there.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Anything else to say about Ohio State before we give Paul the floor a little bit to share his knowledge? I don't really think I have.
Ready for Paul's spiel.
Yeah. Okay, Paul. You want to just take it away, or how do you want to do this? I'm excited. I'm nervous because I don't know what you're going to say to me, and it might hurt me.
It's not as bad as you might think. So,
okay.
All right, I'll just go on a soliloquy here. I'll try to pause for breath every once in a while. So as far as kind of the outlook for the rest of the Big Ten season, I mean, MSU is projected to be pretty good, pretty large favorites in the 3 games that don't involve Purdue. So, I mean, we're looking now at, actually it's more of it's a 9-point favorite against Ohio State rather than 8. And they'll be about 7.5-point favorites over Nebraska right now, or I'm sorry, Northwestern, the other end team. And, you know, the road game at Indiana, about a 5.5-point favorite. So those are still 3 very winnable games. And then you have the game at Purdue where they're probably going to be like a 9-point underdog. And so if you crunch all the numbers on that, which of course I have, MSU is, the Spartans are back down between that sort of 11 and 12 win total mark. So the good news is 12 wins is more likely than 11. So the most likely result is still a 12-8 finish. So that would be most likely winning those 3 winnable games and then dropping to 1 Purdue. Although, sometimes you beat Illinois at home and you lose to Iowa at home. So, weird things happen sometimes. But right now, I mean, the expected win total is 11.44. But, the way it works out, 12 is a little bit more likely than 11. Now the trouble, or it's not really trouble, but the bummer of it is that MSU had actually gotten up to 3rd place, like projected 3rd place above Wisconsin, had a higher expected win total than Wisconsin. Now they've dropped to 5th. So Wisconsin and Northwestern passed MSU, and Nebraska is really just right behind. So we're once again in that position where, that jockeying for that kind of 4th seed in the Big Ten tournament is going to be kind of a dogfight. And in fact, they've already, if we look forward to the Big Ten tournament, right now I have the most likely seed for MSU is the 6. It looks a little bit, that table actually looks a little bit funky. But I mean, basically the problem is they're most likely going to wind up in a tie at some point, most likely with some combination of Nebraska, Northwestern, and Wisconsin. And their combined win-loss record against those teams is really bad. Right now it's 0-4. So they have a chance to make it 1-4 if they beat Northwestern. But, so that it's going to be tough to win any tiebreaker. And so, they could still get that number 4 seed. The odds of getting a seed in the top 4 is down to 25%, which it was over, it was like 60% yet, yesterday before the game. So again, that's how much damage that loss did. But the thing I was thinking as far as the Big Ten tournament goes is the 6th seed might not be that bad, because if I'm remembering this correctly, the 6th seed will play the winner of the 11-14 game in that first round. So that's a play on Thursday, but they'll probably draw the winner of Penn State, Michigan right now is what that looks like. Those are 2 teams. I mean, Michigan, I think one of their top players is, out for the season, the Tennessee transfer. Penn State is a team we've done well against. We seem to match up pretty well with. So, the risk of a bad loss is the thing that's scary. That's kind of actually the biggest benefit of getting a higher seed in the Big Ten tournament is there's less downside. But MSU would have the chance to, potentially, beat a team like Penn State and go on to the next round. So the 6th seed, they get paired with a 3 seed typically. Well, that would project to be Wisconsin. Wisconsin is a little bit of a tailspin right now. So that's maybe not so bad either. And then you would sort of be able to potentially work themselves up to maybe then they would play Illinois, maybe then they would play Purdue. So that path is maybe not so bad. So, if I'm being optimistic, there's a chance that they could rack up some wins, and those would be fairly winnable games. They could still be playing on Sunday. Whereas if you draw like the 4 or 5 seed. I think we should just
stop the conversation right there. That's all I need to hear. That's what's going to happen. And then Purdue is going to lay an egg in the final game, and we're going to come out victorious. Yeah. We're going to come out tired after all of that playing, but we're going to come out with the title. And I think that's the end of our episode. Thanks so much for joining. Just kidding.
Yeah. Stop with the good news. No, it's right. Really, the rest is not so bad. But yeah, I mean, I think that potential path, that might be better than, say, drawing Purdue on, what would it be, Saturday, and, that would maybe be less good. Although I had a weird premonition that MSU is going to beat Purdue at least once this year. I'm just saying, I'm not saying it, but I'm saying it. I don't know when or where, but just feeling that we have their number. Maybe that's wishful thinking. That's fine too. But I mean, right now MSU's odds to win the Big Ten tournament is way better than winning a regular season title. It's about 8.5%, which hey, that's not bad. And Purdue, a little under 50% chance to win the Big Ten tournament. So if you want to take the field, I would advise taking the field there. Although I think I said that last year and they won. But, it's a coin flip. What are you going to do? So that's how the Big Ten tournament is looking to pan out. It's always fun to look at the Big Ten tournament seeding. And then, looking forward towards March, I'm sure there are some segments of the fan base that, we seem to alternate between going to the Final Four and missing the tournament. It's like never either one. Michigan State's either going all the way or, Izzo's terrible, needs to retire, and we're going to the NIT. And of course, since the loss to Iowa, we're back in NIT mode, of course. But, basically all metrics that you look at indicate that there's, MSU is in no danger whatsoever right now. So we can just put that to bed. I even ran some numbers that if MSU were to lose out, based on I recently sort of tuned up an algorithm to try to project NCAA tournament seeds. I still had MSU as an 11 seed if they lose out. So I don't recommend us testing that theory, but and I don't know, because they would potentially be 9 and 11 if they were to actually lose out, and I wouldn't be comfortable that they'd be safe at that point. But the computer was feeling pretty good about it. But I think MSU is safe, and so the question is, if they sort of continue on the same trajectory, where are they headed? Depending on where you look, I think some people were concerned that MSU could fall to that 8-9 line, which would be best to avoid, because for the similar reasons that we talked about with the Big Ten tournament, you want to stay away from that 1 seed, because, again, especially like this year, I think there's a few really good teams, Purdue, UConn, maybe Arizona, who, we'll see 2 of those 3 teams by Selection Sunday. When you get beyond them, maybe Houston, but I honestly don't think so. I'm not terribly frightened of any of those teams. And so the farther you can stay away from a team like Purdue or UConn, especially if Purdue's angry because MSU upset them once, I think that would be a good thing. And I think, honestly, the odds are still pretty good. I think a lot of people still have MSU as like in that 7 seed range, which would be the same as last year. But my calculations actually had MSU a little higher. I was projecting MSU as a 5 seed yesterday, which surprised even me. But again, if you look at the metrics, MSU was like number 20 in the net and like number 15 in KenPom. And, those numbers mean something. And so now whether the committee is smart enough to use them is another question, because they don't always seem to make rational decisions. But I mean, if you look at, if I crunched all the numbers and used the historical trends and, teams with that similar profile, I was projecting MSU with a little bit higher or better seed than a lot of other people were. And there was a few there's like the Bartovic metric. He also had MSU as like a 6 seed, like a very high 6 seed yesterday. So, I mean, obviously the loss will knock him down a little bit. I now project MSU as a 6 seed, but if they kind of move along, kind of go along and like win the winnable games, lose to Purdue, I think a 6 seed is still very much in play. But again, the committee is unpredictable, and you just don't know what they're going to actually do. But that's kind of where I see them. And I think, honestly, a 6 seed is not a bad place to be, because similar to the Big Ten tournament seeding, as we went through, you're kind of avoiding those top seeds for as long as possible. And I think I even did an analysis a few years back where if you were to artificially place like a good team in like any of the 16 slots, the 6 seed was a little bit of an advantage. So if you're a good team and you just, played bad for a few games, then the 6 seed's not a bad place to be. So I'd be happy with that. I'd be real happy with a 6 seed, actually. It's maybe even better than a 4 or 5.
This conversation went way better than I was expecting it to go. So, and I think Brendan kind of mentioned it in a couple of his points too, like MSU fans, and I think social media makes it way worse after a loss like that. Obviously, it was unexpected, so people are going to react bigger. But I've just seen so much stuff recently about like, oh, is Coach Izzo done? Like, should he retire? Like, he's not able to put things together this season. Like, he should move on. And I just think that I think that's a little bit of an overreaction. But I just think that because it's getting so close to the Big Ten tournament and the NCAA tournament, when something goes wrong that you're not expecting, it's like I said earlier, like the sky is falling. But I think those numbers, and I trust numbers, and I trust you, Paul, I think that puts it into better perspective, that it's important to kind of win the winnable games going forward to keep the spot that you're at so that you can keep that, nice seating for both the tournaments going forward. But it's okay if there is a little bit of a fumble or if they're not able to beat Purdue, which is definitely a possibility. I think you should write another article, Paul. Even though it's not as good as your article that you put out a couple days ago, I think those are good numbers and a good reminder for the rest of the regular season. Anything to add, Brendan, since you've just been sitting there nodding along with us? Anything that you want to share about Paul's numbers?
Yeah, no, I was enjoying Paul's speech, but I do think it's necessary for this team to avoid that 8-9 line in the NCAA tournament, because you don't want to play a 1 seed if you make it to that second round. So one thing you can't do, like UConn, I know they lost Purdue. They wouldn't match up with Purdue, but a team like UConn, a team like Houston, I think they would pretty easily handle Michigan State. So I think avoiding that 8-9 line would be huge for Michigan State, whether it be a 7 seed, 6 seed, 5 seed. I think it'll probably be the max that they could possibly reach. I think that's essential. And for those interested, I think a 7 seed might actually be a favorable location, because there's a possibility that they get matched up with Marquette again in the same kind of region as Marquette. And Marquette's looks like they're going to be about a 2 seed or a 3 seed. We'll see it. But if they match up with Marquette's a good enough team to get a favorable location draw. Could be in Indianapolis, which is not a far drive, obviously, from East Lansing. So that's kind of what I have an eye on in terms of traveling. So
road trip, the three of us, Red Cedar Radar podcast live after the win in Indianapolis against Marquette. What do you think about that? The people would pay to watch that.
I would rule that
out. Anything else that you want to share, Paul, before we kind of wrap up our episode here?
I do think that point about Marquette is interesting. I would be curious if they would put MSU in the same bracket as Marquette 2 years in a row, although, it wouldn't shock me, honestly. And you made the comment about Purdue and MSU not being lined up with Purdue. I will say I have seen some brackets that, people that are, anybody can make a bracket, right? That actually had MSU as the 8 or 9 seed in the same pod with Purdue, which generally the committee should not do that. Like, absolutely should not. But because MSU only plays Purdue once in the regular season, there is the chance that they could do that. Like, they're the sort of official seeding principles that the committee uses that doesn't violate them. And in fact, if you remember in 2019, MSU wound up playing Minnesota in the second round, which was stupid that the committee did that, because they almost played Maryland in the third round, which is just like, that's like bracketology malpractice. Like, I would have fired the whole committee and started over had they, and of course everyone was mad that MSU was placed with Duke, but that wound up working okay. So, sometimes the committee, again, does dumb things. And so I wouldn't, there is a scenario where MSU could play Purdue.
Yeah, I'm curious to know how many Big Ten teams were in that tournament when Michigan State played Minnesota, because it doesn't look like Michigan or the Big Ten's going to get a ton of bids. Maybe 6, 7 bids this tournament.
Is where they're at, yeah,
probably 6, right? So I'm curious. I don't know that number off the top of my head, but if there were 10 Big Ten teams in that tournament when Michigan State matched up with Minnesota, it could have been kind of an unavoidable circumstance, perhaps. But yeah, I'm not sure on that.
I'm going to have to make sure that I get a sound bite of Paul saying stupid, and we're going to use it for the future. We'll get a button at Spartans Illustrated. Oh, Paul, you got somebody behind you.
I may have a special guest. One of my interns is
all right.
Trying to join. Oh, hey there, buddy. Okay. Can I finish it? That's okay. So, yeah. So there is that, so we got a new blooper reel now. That's good. So yeah, the committee will sometimes do strange things. And I wouldn't rule that out, but I don't think it'll happen though. Because I think, Brendan, you make a good point that, I think there might've been 8 or 9 teams that year. So they may have not had a choice, but I feel like when I went through that bracket, I was pretty upset because there was like a few alternate scenarios that they could have used and they just didn't. Like, sometimes you can just like swap 2 teams, or you can like bump a team up or down a seed line, which they seem remiss to do, even though, like, if it's team number 16 and team number 17, that's a 4 seed and a 5 seed, but like they're 1 seed, they're 1 position off. You should be able to swap those and not make a big deal, but they don't seem to like to do that.
So here's my question about that. If you're a fan or if you're MSU, wouldn't you rather see a team that you already know their makeup and you've already played a couple times in the tournament? Or are you coming from a stance of like you would rather? Yeah, I guess tell me your logic on that.
I don't like rematches in general.
Okay.
I'm more familiar with playing the devil you don't know in this case, and part of that's because I think Izzo is a better coach than most coaches in the NCAA, and I think that a lot of the Big Ten coaches have enough experience going against them that it gives them an advantage.
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
There's a common school of thought that MSU likes to be in transition. They like to run, and most of the Big Ten coaches know that they have to emphasize getting back. And so in Big Ten play, it's very difficult for MSU to do that. But there's been a couple cases over time where there's been a team that MSU has never played, and they just absolutely blitz them with transition in the tournament because they're just not ready. And I think that scenario is much more likely.
That's a good point.
Than playing Matt Painter, who knows Coach Izzo very well. Yeah. So I don't like that. I'd like
thinking about who we have as our coach, and then whoever random team that we run into may not know truly who we have as our coach. Yeah, that makes sense. Sense.
Also, same could apply vice versa as well.
That's true. Yeah. Anything else that you guys want to talk about before we kind of end our episode here? I feel like we put out the fire that was happening on Twitter maybe a little bit. Hopefully people will listen and take a deep breath listening to Paul's soothing numbers. I don't think I have anything else. Anything else, Brendan, Paul, that you want to add on?
I don't think so.
MSU's got to take care of business coming up.
Yep. I will say one other thing is that the nice thing about the schedule is that MSU, I think, only plays 1 game in like the next 14, 15 days because they get Ohio State after a pretty good break. And then they actually get kind of a bye because they don't have a midweek game. They play Purdue, I think, on Saturday. And I think that is very critical that Tom Izzo's going to have him locked down in East Lansing for 2 weeks straight, basically. And I would not expect those practices to be pleasant. So, Izzo is the master at tightening screws at the end of February to get ready for March. And so I think there's, the optimist in me, which is pretty much all of me, feels that there's a good chance he's going to get this team, locked down enough to get him to play well for the next couple of weeks. Now, I have the same concern that Brendan has, that once they get to the tournament, can they really focus to play a good 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games in a row? Probably not, because they haven't shown that they can do that. And human nature at some point rears its ugly head. And that's a fundamental flaw of this team that I don't think will get better. But I think they still got some good wins in them and some exciting moments. And I think we'll see some of those before the year's out.
Yeah, I think you're right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining the pod, Brendan and Paul. It's always fun to have you guys on. Please check out Spartans Illustrated. Links to the website, to the forum will be down below. Consider subscribing. Brendan is obviously putting out great content on the forum, like he said before, so check that out. Paul is pumping out great articles, as we've touched on in a lot of our videos here together, kind of breaking things down, heading into March. Definitely check those out by subscribing to Spartans Illustrated. You can listen to this podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or check us out on YouTube. I always mess up the outro. Consider subscribing there as well. And maybe someday, if you listen through the whole episode, I will do a better outro. Maybe that should have been my New Year's resolution, but it's too late now. Next year. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. Talk to you all later. Bye.